Have you ever stopped to think that the greatest hero in your life might be someone you never even met? Sounds strange, doesn't it? In a world obsessed with instant gratification, instant likes, quick replies, fast-track happiness, we forget that the deepest stories take time to truly understand. This is one of those stories. A story that didn't start with smiles and hugs, but with an absence that turned into strength and a goodbye that became a legacy. While most people think that healing means forgetting, here you'll discover the opposite. True healing comes from remembering with love, with gratitude, and with courage. Together, we'll dive into a real story that proves love doesn't end where touch fades, and that some presences are so powerful, not even death can erase them. Get ready to see what most people choose to ignore. Sometimes, pain isn't the end of the road, but the beginning of a transformation. If you've ever felt lost after a loss, if you've ever thought life had taken too much from you, this story is for you. In every word, you'll find not just tears, but strength, not just longing, but purpose. Because in the end, life always finds a way to bloom, even from the most wounded soil. Sometimes life takes turns no one could ever predict. Everything was ready for his return home. The house tidy, the baby's room decorated, hope floating in the air. But that morning, between the smell of fresh coffee and the timid light slipping through the window, the phone rang. You know those moments that change everything before you even realize it? She picked up the phone with a light heart and a ready smile, never imagining that call would place the weight of the world on her shoulders. On the other end, a trembling officer's voice shattered her dreams in an instant. No preparation, no warning, just the raw and brutal news. He was gone, lost on duty. In seconds, the ground disappeared beneath her feet, as if reality had twisted into something unrecognizable. People often say your life can change in a blink, but you never truly grasp it until it happens. And as much as she tried to understand, her heart could only scream silently, unable to find words to match the pain. Breathing became hard, thinking even harder. She looked around at the empty crib, the tiny clothes folded neatly, the unopened letters on the table. Everything they had planned together now seemed like an unfinished painting left behind in a world that cruelly kept spinning. And yet, deep inside the chaos, a tiny spark of strength began to flicker. Because even then, something inside whispered, this wasn't the end of their story. In the days that followed, every object in the house seemed to tell a story that would never be lived. The crib, with its clean sheets carefully tucked in, sat quietly, waiting for hands that would never rock it. Sometimes, she found herself sitting on the nursery floor, clutching one of the tiny baby shirts. Try to picture what it would have been like to see him there beside them, exchanging looks full of love and pride. But when she opened her eyes, there was only silence, heavy, loud, and louder than any scream. Still, life inside her kept moving. Each kick, each flutter was a reminder that even through sorrow, something precious was growing. She whispered to her belly, told it stories, sang songs he would have loved to hear. It was her way of keeping him close, of turning love into something living and breathing, something that couldn't be taken. And in every soft word, she tried to plant a seed of hope that might one day bloom beyond the pain. The days crawled forward, slow and heavy. Getting out of bed felt like a battle, facing the world even harder. But she chose to keep going, for herself, for him, and especially for the baby he never got to meet. In the midst of the absence, she chose to be the presence. And without even knowing, that quiet, stubborn strength was beginning to build a story the world would never forget. The big day arrived wrapped in a strange mix of fear and hope, alone in the delivery room. Gripping the hand of a nurse she didn't even know, she felt the first contraction hit, like life reminding her that it doesn't wait for perfect moments. Outside, the rain pounded against the windows, as if the whole world was mourning with her. Every breath, every push was a silent battle between despair and courage. And even though he wasn't there, deep down she knew that baby needed her to fight harder than ever. When the baby's cry finally echoed through the room, something inside her broke wide open. It was a small sound, but it carried enough weight to tear through months of grief. With trembling hands, she held the tiny, wrinkled face close, and in those little features, she saw him, his eyes, his nose, even a stubborn little chin. It was as if life, in all its mystery, had left her a piece of him to hold on to. A gift, a silent promise that love never really dies. Walking out of the hospital with the baby bundled tightly against her chest, the world outside felt cold and indifferent. No balloons, no welcome home banners, no arms waiting to wrap around her. Just a gray sky and the heavy knowledge that every step forward now carried twice the weight, hers and his. As she tucked the blanket tighter around her baby, she realized that while life had taken so much, it had also given her a brand new reason to keep moving, even when her knees threatened to buckle. The day of the funeral arrived shrouded in a heavy mist, as if even the sky refused to smile. The coffin, draped in the worn American flag, stood alone at the center of the chapel, surrounded by almost unbearable silence. She entered quietly, the baby nestled against her chest, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Every step she took echoed through the empty hall, a quiet witness to her grief. It was the kind of moment no one ever dreams of living, and yet here she was, holding herself together as best she could, approaching the casket. Her trembling hand rested on the cold wood. She wanted to say so much, to tell him about their son, about the life they had imagined together. She wanted him to see the baby, to feel the weight of what they had created. But the words wouldn't come, only tears. She knelt down, pressed her forehead against the flag, and let the pain pour out without shame. It was the last moment she would ever share with him, even if it was only an illusion. And somehow, the silence around her felt sacred, as if the whole world had paused to let her say goodbye. A few people watched from a respectful distance, lost in their own emotions. But to her, there was no one else in the room. Just her, the baby, and the memory of the man she loved. She stayed there long enough to imprint every detail into her soul. The feel of the wood, the weight of the flag, the faint smell of white lilies placed around him. This would be all that remained now. And even though she wasn't ready, she knew deep down it was time to let go. Not because she wanted to, but because real love demands courage, even when it means saying goodbye. In the days after the funeral, the house felt frozen in time. The smell of flowers left behind still lingered in the air, mixing with warm bottles of milk and the soft cries of a newborn. Every wall, every corner whispered his name. The absence was so thick. She sometimes thought she could reach out and touch it, yet between diaper changes and sleepless nights, she slowly discovered the hidden strength of those who carry the weight of the world without ever letting it show. Bills didn't wait for grief. Responsibilities came knocking hard and fast, buying diapers, sorting out military documents, figuring out how to make ends meet. It felt like the universe had lined up every challenge it could find just to test her limits. And even though she wanted to scream, to quit, to hide under the covers forever, she kept going. Not because she felt strong, but because she was now the only anchor her baby had left. Sometimes, courage looked a lot like just showing up, even when your heart is falling apart. Each slow, heavy morning, she found new ways to survive, whether it was accepting help from a neighbor or celebrating tiny victories, like getting the baby to sleep for more than 2 hours at a stretch. In those small wins, she realized something he would have wanted her to know. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing up again, even when your knees are shaking. And in a quiet, almost invisible way, the baby, even without knowing, was teaching the most important lesson of all, that love, once planted, keeps growing no matter what. Some days, the weight felt almost unbearable. She would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, as if the silence of the house had turned into a deafening roar. In those moments, she would look over at the crib and find, in her baby's peaceful sleep, the only anchor left. No matter how heavy her chest felt or how indifferent the outside world seemed, she couldn't give up. Deep inside, she carried a promise, one she had never spoken out loud, to the man who now rested beneath the cold earth, to raise their son with all the love they had dreamed of, every bottle warmed, every bath given, every lullaby sung carried that silent promise. It wasn't grand gestures or public honors that kept his memory alive. It was the simple, quiet moments of everyday life. Legacy, she realized, isn't built on medals and ceremonies. It's built on presence, even in absence, and on love passed down through whispered stories and gentle touches. She would be the voice in the arms that showed their son who his father was. Even though they would never meet, slowly, the pain began to shift from being a wall to becoming a bridge. She started writing letters to their son, telling him stories about his father, his bad jokes, his stubbornness, his impossible dreams. Maybe you would never fully understand. Maybe time would blur the details. But still, she wrote, it was her way of making sure that across all the years and distances, her son would hear a quiet message from a man who loved him before he was even born. I was here. The light didn't come all at once, but it came, shy at first, like a sliver of sunshine slipping through a cracked door. Sometimes it showed up in her baby's toothless grin. Sometimes a memory that made her chest warm instead of ache. Sadness still lived inside her, of course, but now it shared space with tiny flickers of joy, like candles bravely burning in the dark. And in each of those small moments, she realized something powerful. Finding happiness again wasn't betrayal of his memory. It was the highest way to honor it. It would have been easy to drown in grief, to get stuck and never resurface. But she understood that doing so would erase the future. They had dreamed it together. So even on the hardest days, she searched for something good. The smell of fresh cookies from a neighbor's kitchen, her son's laughter at his own reflection, the feel of a cool breeze against her face. Little things that, alone, might not seem like much, but together, they formed a quilt of hope, stitched slowly and patiently with trembling hands. She learned that healing didn't mean forgetting or pretending it hadn't happened. Healing meant living anyway, allowing love to keep flowing in new shapes. In every game on the living room floor, in every bedtime story whispered into sleepy ears, in every hug given just because she kept his memory alive. And somewhere deep inside she knew, even in the darkest nights, there would always be small lights leading the way forward. Time, that quiet and stubborn craftsman, slowly reshaped her days. The pain, once sharp and raw, softened into a tender scar, always there, but no longer stopping her from moving. She found herself dreaming again, cautiously at first, like someone knocking gently on hope's door. Maybe she could go back to school, maybe find a job that brought more security for her and her son, maybe even travel someday, to places he had once talked about visiting. And for the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem like a betrayal. With her son growing strong and curious, every small milestone felt like a massive victory. His first step, his first word, the first scribble drawing taped proudly to the fridge. She knew somehow that he would have been so proud. Maybe that's the secret of life. Even after the greatest losses, hope still finds ways to bloom through the cracks. As she allowed herself to smile without guilt and plan without fear, she realized she wasn't leaving him behind. She was carrying him with her into every new dream. Of course, there were still days when the waves of grief came crashing back. Birthdays, anniversaries, quiet nights when the world seemed too silent. But she had learned to dance in the rain, to welcome what she couldn't change. And with every new dream built brick by brick, she left a footprint in the world, teaching her son and reminding herself that life is meant to be lived fully, even when our hearts carry invisible scars. Teaching him to love someone he never knew. As the boy grew older, the questions started coming. First, it was curious glances at the photos scattered around the house. Then one day, the word she had been bracing for, Mom, who's he? Every question hit her like an arrow straight to heart, but it was also a rare gift. She always answered with a soft, steady voice, telling stories she guarded like precious treasures. She spoke of how kind he was, how stubborn, how he loved a joke even when no one else was laughing. She painted him so vividly that to her son, it was as if his father had simply stepped out for a while. Instead of hiding the pain, she chose to share the truth. She explained that life is precious and sometimes heartbreakingly short. She told him his father was a hero, but more than that, he was a man who dreamed of being dad above all else. And even though the war had taken his body, nothing could take the love he had left behind. Some days it was harder than others. Sometimes her voice would catch, and she'd have to pause and breathe through the ache. But she knew, giving her son the gift of knowing his father was worth every tear. Teaching him to love someone he had never met took a kind of artistry. It meant balancing sorrow with hope, loss with gratitude. But she did it patiently weaving a tapestry of memories and stories. And as her son grew, he carried his father's legacy not in things, but in his heart, strong, kind, and resilient. Without even realizing it, she was shaping a boy who could feel deeply, miss without being broken, and find strength in the spaces love had left behind. The legacy that lives in silence years past, but some absences are never truly filled. Even so, she could see him, the man she loved, in the way her son moved through the world, in the way he chased his dreams fearlessly, in the way he looked at people with genuine respect, in the quiet courage he showed when things got hard. Even though he had never heard his father's voice, he carried the echo of his strength inside him. And for her, that was proof that real love doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape in every little triumph. A diploma earned through late nights and hard work, a first one on the field, a random act of kindness to a stranger. She saw pieces of life they had dreamed of building together. It was never about medals or ceremonies. It was about character, about being a light in a world that so often forgets how much that matters. And every time her son smiled or reached out to help someone, it felt like his father was there too, silent, invisible, but undeniably present. Looking back now, she understood some love stories don't end the way we wish they would, but they are still the most beautiful ones, not because they avoided pain, but because they transformed it into strength, into wisdom, into love that ripples outward in ways no one can ever fully measure. And deep down, she knew he may never have gotten a chance to hold his son in his arms, but he carried him in his heart until his very last breath. And that kind of legacy, it never fades.